4 a.m. mid-May at Hunsdon Mead. A skylark rises, singing to greet the dawn. But sounds and experiences like this do not happen by accident. They're the result of conservation work carried out by dedicated individuals in the Stort Valley. Listen as we talk to some of them in Stort-Voices in Conservation. It is the start of a new year, and first of all we hear from artist Alan Burgess, who lives in Roydon and who has a special interest in black poplars.
Well, I have been fond of trees a lot, and painting them I find they're very impressive. And we've done a lot of work in the parish identifying veteran trees. I must say that the poplars were a blind spot for me. I thought they were not very interesting. And then there was a survey encouraged by the Daily Telegraph, and we looked at one tree which was interesting, took a twig, sent it off to the Forest Commission, and lo and behold it was genuine. It was female, which is rare. I thought that would be our stock really, since only 1,000 had been recorded over the country. But in fact we went on and found about 30. They were needing pollarding. We got a grant, so we didn't sort of ruthlessly pollard them. And that means they've survived. The question is really whether my enthusiasm for painting them is partly to do with conservation. The fact that these black poplars, female black poplars, give maybe a bit of distinction to the parish, and it's good to find something which is really rare. And we did a wonderful week work with the Roydon School in 2001. They studied, they saw the tree surgeon at work, they looked at diagrams and they wrote stuff, poems and things like that, and did paintings. I think that was very memorable. So why do I like black poplars? Well, I wouldn't take much from the ordinary robusta or these fast-growing poplars, but they do have so much character. I mean, it takes a time. They get old, they get burrs, they get good colour. The way they grow when they're pollard or something falls off is very interesting. And the one here is from household mead, biowater of course, and all sorts of things going on. It hasn't been touched, but branches have fallen off, they've grown around, and it's good colour in the trunks too at times. So I find they are fascinating to paint, as fascinating as really.
In 2010, Gilston Parish Council obtained big lottery funding for 40 barn owl nest boxes. These came delivered flat packed and had to be assembled. Landowners were then visited, and using the advice freely given by Peter Wilkinson from the Hawk and Owl Trust, 38 boxes were put up from Manudon right the way through to Roydon. Several of these boxes were quickly occupied the following year, and broods of barn owl, kestrel and stock doves raised. Every year the boxes are checked, and if chicks are present they are ringed so that we can study their survival and dispersal rates. There is little doubt that the continuing success of this project has made it much more likely that you will be able to see barn owl hunting on a late winter's afternoon. John Slee has an area centring on Pishobury Park in Stort-Voices as his local birding patch. He describes the satisfaction derived from visiting his patch on a regular basis and recording the birds he sees at all seasons of the year.
Well, I've always been interested in birds, always liked to just go out and watch birds. And I've been in the area for 20 years and will go up and down the river various places. My particular local patch started when with a train journey. So it started with a train journey, and we left Sawbridge with a station going towards London, and there was a flooded field, and I thought, well, I can't remember that. So I went down a couple of days later to have a look, and there were lapwings and common terns, but not just on the field, in the surrounding bushes on the riverside there was a blackcap and spotted flycatcher, and I thought, well, I didn't realise this was here. So I started walking that area regularly. The particular pond concerned had been formed by a farmer deciding to block the drain, and so what had been a grazing field suddenly became waterlogged, and for a few years that was a fantastic patch, but it's now grown and become overgrown, and so it has a different set of wildlife there, possibly more representative. But I started walking the area and found really quite a goldmine of different habitats and different birds. And then a few years ago I moved within Stort-Voices, and the new house put me right on the edge of this patch, not by accident, I would say. And this has become my regular patch. I can walk out of the door and I can start seeing birds and wildlife as soon as I'm out of the door, and I've got a walk that takes me down along the river and into local fields and local areas. And it has a number of there's nothing in particular that's special, no one feature that's special about the patch. It's really the combination of habitats. We're fortunate in that a short hour and a half leisurely walk could take me through woodland, farmers' fields, alongside the river. There's a pond, there's waterlogged fields, hedgerows, rough fields, farmed fields, a wide variety of habitats in the area, and a lot of wildlife in that. As a result, there's quite a range of bird species. I've seen on and off, I've been counting for a few years exactly how many birds I see and how many species I see, and I see about 90 species per year, give or take, and that's I suspect it'll be slightly less this year because the pond has become, as I said, has become overgrown, so a few of the ducks species are going to be a bit harder to get. But you never know what's going to turn up.
Colin Plant, author of The Moths of Hertfordshire, tells us of the value of lowland calcareous fen to wildlife, with special reference to Stort-Voices Marsh Nature Reserve, and in particular highlights the value to moths and other invertebrates.
The book of the moths of Hertfordshire.
I did indeed, right.
And
the moths of
just
Hertfordshire.
If you would tell us how you got into doing that, really.
Yeah, it's got a rather more complex title, because we're a bit like that. It's actually called The Moths of Hertfordshire, the history, status, distribution and phenology of the micro and macro Lepidoptera of a southeastern English county. Which sounds horribly pretentious. But actually it's for a reason, because what it is, it's not just a list of moths, which, let's face it, is a pretty nerdy thing. And if you put them all in Latin names, nobody's going to be interested anyway. It's obviously got the list of moths, because otherwise you've got nothing to talk about. That's your starting point. Well, the real question is, what does it mean? At a very simple level, is it a common moth you can find in your garden everywhere in Hertfordshire? Or is it one that you have to go to the local woods to find? Or is it, dare I say, one that you have to go down to Stort-Voices Marsh to find even? And there are a few. In fact, there is one, I believe, that's only at Stort-Voices Marsh in the county. So that's important, because that starts telling you something about the ecology of things, so that the expanded and rather pretentious title.
book is Stort Marsh Nature Reserve.
Yeah.
I mean, could you tell us something about the value of that type of habitat?
Well, the habitat is immensely important. The habitat at Stort Marsh is basically a fen. A fen habitat is basically, well, it's a category of wetland. Wetland doesn't really need much explanation, but you can imagine that, you know, a wet forest and a wet meadow are not quite the same. The thing about fens is that the water which feeds them almost always, in fact I can't think of any exceptions in Britain, but almost always comes from an underlying spring source somewhere, or at least a seepage, if not a proper spring. And it is coming from mineral rich ground, so that the pH is raised, which is, in other words, means it's tending towards the alkaline side of things rather than the acid side of things, because a very low pH is acid. pH of 1 would be sulfuric acid, pH of 14 would be sodium. Only persists in one or two places. So Stort presents an extremely unusual, in the sense of, you know, numerical frequency, an unusual habitat. It's a scarce habitat. Because it's an ancient habitat, of course, it's developed a huge following of invertebrate species, including moths, because every single plant in Britain has an insect of some kind associated with it. There is nothing in this country that does not. It's only imported foreign plants that will sometimes not have associated invertebrates. So you've got a long established, i.e. thousands of years habitat. Admittedly this is only a small part of it, but the habitat itself has been established for thousands of years. It's developed an association with a huge number of invertebrates, including moths, as I say, and so if you now take a small chunk of that habitat and plonk it in the Stort Valley, you're going to get an equivalent chunk of the species that comes with it.
The reintroduction of water voles to the Stort Valley has got to be one of the success stories from recent years. Martin Ketcher, water vole and invasive species officer from the Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, describes the process briefly and the important water vole monitoring which takes place on a regular basis to check the progress of the reintroduction.
The driver for the water vole reintroduction at Thorley Wash came from Fingringhoe on the Essex coast, where there was a proposal to breach a sea wall and flood an area which included several ditches in which there were water voles. So the water voles there had to be captured and kept in captivity, and then they formed the basis of the ones that were reintroduced to Thorley Wash, and they were added to others from other sites, so there was a genetic mix for the population that did come into Thorley Wash in the end. Thorley Wash was chosen because it has a whole range of different water bodies, so it's got the canal and the old river backwater, plus a whole range of ditches, so we've got a wide variety of habitats for the water voles to occupy, and it does mean that any population occupying such a habitat is more robust, it's less vulnerable to mink predation. Where you've got the width of the habitat as there is at Thorley and the variety of water bodies, it's much less likely for mink to get in and affect the population. The other thing about the reason that Thorley was chosen as a reintroduction site was its location within the valley, and there was opportunities for water voles to expand from there. Once they get established, they can move up and down the Stort, up towards Harlow into Rushmead and the lakes up there, or down the river towards Stort Marsh and so on. So it was a good centre from which the water voles could expand. So that we're surveying parts of the canal, parts of the backwater and various ditches, something like 100 metres for each section. So we'll survey something like 1,200 metres, covering the whole range of habitats within the reserve, and counting up the number of signs that we're seeing. And then we're able then to compare how the water voles are doing from spring into autumn, and how they're doing from one spring to the next spring and so on. So when we're surveying, we are not looking for individual animals, we are looking for all the evidence, signs that water voles leave. to show their presence. It could be that we're looking for footprints in the mud, but again, rat footprints are very similar to waterfowl footprints, so it's not a conclusive factor. In particular, you're looking for the feeding signs where they will cut the sedge and other marginal plants, cut the stems of those. But then the really conclusive thing is the droppings that they leave. The female in particular is using the droppings, her droppings, as a territorial marker. So she would choose one or more places within her territory.
In 2010, a wet woodland audit carried out for the Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust revealed 35 such sites in the Stort Valley. For our purposes, we are taking the wet alder woodland at Rushy Mead, the wet woodland at the base of the Iron Age hill fort at Spurlbrook with its tussock sedge, and the wet willow woodland at Strawberry Marsh. Wet woodland is one of the most rich and biodiverse of habitats. The typical listing gives something like 7 different species of soldier flies, 9 different types of hoverflies, 16 different types of crane flies, 5 different types of slugs and snails, 12 different types of spiders, a mixture of centipedes, woodlice and stoneflies, 3 specialist dragonflies, 4 different types of true bugs, 7 different types of true flies, 5 beetles, 9 weevils, 15 types of rogue beetle, 21 types of longhorn beetle, and 14 different types of caddisfly. There are also ants, bees and wasps, and to this you have to add the variety of mosses, fungi and higher plants. We are very fortunate to have such a wide variety of wet woodland in the Stort Valley, and this is something we should be valuing and looking forward to preserve and encourage as much as possible. Colin Lincoln describes how a rather nondescript area of rough grassland near to Maymead's Marsh Nature Reserve in Harlow has been converted by hard and consistent effort into a flower-rich meadow.
In 2017, we were able to appoint a contractor to come and start on the meadow, and so March 1st, 2017, he came in with the tractor and started to cut the old meadow sward, the grass to regenerate, and then they came in and sprayed whatever regeneration there was sprayed with glyphosate herbicide to kill off anything that was still growing, and then it was, once it was dead, it was then cultivated for the first time. This process of spraying and cultivation was carried out 3 times to make sure we killed nearly 100% of the old grass sward, and then we came to the point in August, when they were able to sow a mixture of wildflower, native wildflower mixture, in the meadow. All this work was done by the contractor because it was beyond the scope of the volunteers to do it, considering the area of the meadow, which is at 1.5 hectares. And so they sowed the seed mixture, which contained 23 species of native wildflower species and 4 species of non-invasive vigorous or non-vigorous grasses. Moving on from then into 2018, we saw the first flowers appearing, and this was in April. We had quite a haze of red campions flowering right across the meadow, so it showed quite promise to what was going to follow when all the other species started to flower. Amongst the mixture later into the season, we were getting yellow rattle and oxeye daisies starting to show, not in vast numbers, but they were quite early.
Next, David Sampson tells us of the enthusiasm and interest that he developed in photographing and observing dragonflies and damselflies. He particularly describes the excitement of finding a new addition to our local fauna in the shape of the beautiful willow emerald damselfly.
Yeah, that's it. I moved to Salford in 2002, and I started walking along the river and thinking, wow, what a lovely habitat. You know, and I walked around what is now Thorley Wash Reserve, wasn't then, it was just had a fence round, I think, at that time, thinking, oh, that would be a good reserve, that would be, wouldn't it? Why can't someone take that up? But anyway, I noticed there were a reasonable number of dragonflies, so really I took the opportunity, and by then I'd got myself a decent digital camera, so I started filming them, or taking photographs of them. I mean, the first ones were the small red damselflies, no, the red-eyed damselflies, sorry. They were on the river. They were quite attractive, because I'd never seen them before anywhere. And then there was the emperors. We get good, reasonable numbers of emperors, probably 2 or 3 in a season. That's a lot for them, for that area. And then, of course, I started to see quite good numbers of brown hawkers, the migrant hawkers, which I've never seen in good numbers until then.
Next, David describes his enthusiasm for the banded Agrian damselfly.
I had one of those in Dagenham Park the year before I left, so they started to move in. But when I came to Stortford, they were everywhere, and they were such beautiful things. And I thought, wow, you know, I'd like to photograph them. And of course, since then, I've got quite a lot of photographs of them. It could be a bit boring, really, but I always photograph them every year.
And now the story behind the finding of the willow emerald damselfly.
In fact, I went to Amwell to see it because it had been reported there, and I found it myself without nobody telling me what it was, and I knew instantly what it was because it was so different. It's quite a large damselfly and quite robust really, and lovely greeny silvery colour, bronzy. But I knew from the way it held its wings and that, those species of damselfly do. That's what it was. And blow me, the following year I found one along the Stort, just past. So they're definitely becoming much more common. Don't know how long that's going to last. But to me, that's a special species to me. Well, not necessarily because I found the first ones, although it's nice to have that sort of recognition, but because they're such a blooming lovely insect. They really are.
The Abbey family from Roydon have a long association with Hunsdon Mead Nature Reserve, and it is through their efforts with management over the years that we can now enjoy this unique area of Lammas grassland with its rich flora, bird and insect life. Let David tell you the story.
Well, Hunsdon Mead is a unique piece of land because it's been farmed in the same way for a long time. It is common winter grazing for people, not for commoners, but for people who have registered their rights. But the grazing, they call them the grazing rights, are owned by the lord of the manor, who then let grazing for mowing in the summertime. We're not allowed to mow it until the 1st of July, and the common grazing can start on the 12th of August, which is Old Lammas Day. I was very aware of the green-winged orchids on the mead. We always try to keep it secret as to where they were, because we knew at the time people would come and dig them up. And of course, that was then got lost. They would never keep them going. Doing a film on it for ITV, Anglia TV, I would not show the orchids to them. We pointed out to the bugle and made out that they were the orchids. Nobody seemed to notice, which rather pleased me. So the green-wing orchids, they are still there, and I won't say thriving, but they're hanging in there. The other plant on the mead, which is very prevalent, is the yellow rattle. Yellow rattle is a peculiar thing that it actually feeds off the roots of the existing grass and kills it, but also the ground goes bare, but it allows it to reseed. The ground gets reseeded by the grass around it, so the yellow rattle. My father started cutting the mead of hay probably in the late 30s, 1930s. Father cut it after he came out of the army after the First War in the early 20s, and it was cutting the hay mainly for sale because he wasn't using it. It wasn't good enough for his herd of cattle, his cows, which were so important to him. One year, unfortunately, his mixtures failed and he hadn't got mixture hay for his cattle. So reluctantly he told the cowman, Jim, you'll have to use that old mead hay. I don't know where it'll go. Surprise, surprise, he found his milk yield went up when he was feeding them with the mead hay, and he valued it slightly higher from that moment onwards.
We are told that the Stort has a good population of a range of coarse fish. Regular visits by the Environment Agency keep a check on the health of the population, as described by Jordan Hambidge from the Environment Agency on one of their electrofishing surveys.
So we do these fish surveys to analyse the fish population this one in particular on the River Stort, and the dynamics of the fish population. So how many juvenile fish we have, how many adult fish we have, what species we have, and what abundance we have. And that way we can get a general assessment of how healthy the river is, or in particular what this specific bit of habitat is providing towards the fish population. So is it spawning grounds, is it nursery grounds for juvenile fish, or is it a hangout for adult fish?
This survey took place in the Milltail backwater at Hunsdon Mead. A 100-metre transect was selected and a barrier net put in place at each end.
At the back, which produces the electricity, that runs directly to our control box, which allows us to control how many anodes it goes to and how powerful we want it. And then that runs directly to the anodes, which is essentially where we draw the fish towards. So once this is in the water, it creates a current field with that cathode at the back, which creates a field around the boat, and then the anode head creates about 2 to 3 meters of field around it, which draws the fish into it. So then we're able to just net them up, place them into these holding tanks where they're aerated and they recover immediately.
Fish caught between the electrodes are harmlessly stunned by the current and captured in a hand net. Great care is taken in handling the fish, and an oxygenated air supply provided for the holding tank. After measuring and recording, all fish are returned safely to the backwater.
Still green. Days 119.
A good and healthy cross-section of fish were captured, including roach, perch, dace, chub, bream and pike.
Yeah, that's really good actually.
Every day, it seems that we are assailed by tales of impending environmental catastrophe by the media. A lot of this is true, but in the last 30 minutes you have seen that our local Stort Valley is a treasure house rich in wildlife and special habitats. Now's the time not only to get out and enjoy these wildlife spectacles for ourselves, but also to support the work of the wildlife trusts in recognising, protecting and developing this very special green corridor so it remains to be enjoyed by generations to come.